All right. Just to check, you should be able to see a screen that says July 2023 discussion of places that matter. Perfect. So this is part of a series of discussions that I'm doing every month to really just explore different aspects of your story. So I've described on previous webinars that I think your story is a humongous big thing. Like I've sometimes quote an author called Kathy Renson-Brink, who describes it as being like an anatomically incorrect octopus with all of these tentacles flailing around, and in telling it, you're trying to tame it and understand it, and it's in the telling of it that you bring it under control, because an untold story can cause all sorts of problems. It causes like all sorts of negative traps and negative self-talk as well. So I think it's worth telling your story, obviously for yourself, for your own benefit, and also because it then, it's a vulnerable way of building trust and communicating authentically and doing authentic marketing, which is what we're here to do. I think that's what the world needs, is more authenticity. So I'm actually going to share a few stories, because location is one of those things where, like, you can't just tell a story about a location. The location is always the setting. There's something that you did in that location, or there's somebody that you were with in that location. The location for me is just a way of getting to think about the things that you did in those places. I think there's another layer to it as well, though, because I think some locations, give you a different sense of vibration, or you feel more at home. I don't fully claim to know how that works, but I buy into, in principle, the idea of, thin places, or some places that just resonate with you more. And I think when you feel those vibrations, when you have places that you go to that you can recharge faster, then I think that's worth exploring. I think just by exploring your story doesn't mean you necessarily have to tell it. The first task is to explore it, document it, see what resonates with you. And often you find that you might think about places that you think, no, my list isn't going to be interested in this, and then you share that story, and then you're surprised at how other people kind of resonate with it, even if they've never been there. So I'm going to hopefully talk for no more than 20 or 30 minutes. I will record this part of the presentation for the recording. After that, it's going to be open discussion, which I have to say is optional. Don't do mandatory discussion or breakout rooms. So yeah, it's optional discussion to discuss any ideas that have come up for you. And with the idea being that, we can discuss them, we can kind of flesh them out a bit. I'll give you my sort of feedback based on what you've told me. This session, or this series of sessions, is for people who, it's not really for people who are just setting out. It's for people who are, in some respects, experienced at what they do, and also you're good at what you do. You're also in business for more than just money. So yes, obviously money is a primary driver. You want to pay the bills, etc. But it's not the only reason. In some sense as well, you are a pioneer. And what I mean by that is you have a unique perspective, system, process. You provide a unique transformational outcome. And based on that, you have to tell your story, because your story is the thing that communicates that to people at an emotional level. They might not necessarily go and search for what you do, because you're not just another tradesperson, or you're not just another person selling a known service. And there's something unique about what you do. So then you have to communicate that uniqueness by telling your story. I think both of you know me fairly well, but I'm going to just go through this section for the recording. So for anyone watching this who is new to me, new to story copywriters, I identify as a father of two and a husband of one, which is quite enough on both counts. I also identify as a barefoot runner, truth seeker. I'm an author of a book called Simple Story Selling. In my work, I don't really conveniently fit into any box, but I usually describe myself as a copywriter and multi-channel direct marketing consultant. These are my feet on a barefoot run. So this is the park at the end of my road, where in the temperate seasons, or anytime it's above about 3 degrees Celsius, I will go and run barefoot, which really started as a way of overcoming injury, and I've since discovered that I really love it. So I do that in the temperate seasons. I live in Sheffield in England, which is a city of which we're going to explore today because today's topic is locations. But it's a city of brewing. We have outstanding beer, if that's your thing, and we have. I think we are the greenest city in the UK, potentially in Europe, if you consider like the number of trees and parks and green spaces and woodland. First and foremost, I'm trying to be a builder of authentic connections. As I mentioned, I think that's what the world needs. I kind of operate business from the perspective that I kind of think most businesses have all of the new leads you already need, or you already had all of them if you had the mechanisms and systems to stay in contact with those people. So often most businesses think that lead generation is the issue, whereas I actually think possibly a bigger bottleneck is building real connections with the leads that are coming in. So I'm going to share a few anecdotes and a few pictures, and I think it's worth noting actually up front that pictures do look, when you're thinking about location, it does lend itself to photos. So that's a useful way of exploring this. When I go through this process with clients, I ask them to bring a few photos to the call, as a minimum 3. Usually I ask people to bring one from early life, one from early work, and one from recent work, but it could be anything. I've had clients bring much more. This is a photo I took in about 2016, 2017, and it's from a place called Thurs Common on the Wirral, which is where I grew up. So the Wirral is a small peninsula in between Liverpool and Wales in northwest England, and this is actually looking out towards Liverpool. So this building here is the hospital where I was born, called Arrow Park Hospital. And when you're there in person, you can actually see Liverpool over here. I think something that this brings up for me as well is like I spent a lot of time walking around Thurs Common with my granddad when I was small. So last month's topic was the people that matter, and I talked about my granddad quite a lot. And this is one of the places I used to come with him. I used to spend summer holidays at my granddad's, and we'd go and walk the dogs first thing in the morning, and we'd always come up to here. This is the highest point on the Wirral, so it's a fairly flat peninsula. So when I was small, this felt like a huge hill, and then since I now live in Sheffield, which is much more hilly, I've discovered it's not a big hill, but it felt like a big hill when I was small. So you can look out that way, you see over to Liverpool. If you look out the other way, you see over the River Dee estuary over to North Wales on the far side. When you look at these things, it's always worth asking, what is the interesting fact about the thing that you're looking at? For me, the interesting fact here is that there's actually a disused railway line that goes along here. It's now called the Wirral Way. It's a walking path now, basically. So I sometimes like to look out towards North Wales and imagine the steam trains of the past that would have gone across here. The River Dee, which is this river, which separates Wales and England, runs down to a city called Chester. Chester was a Roman garrison town. So I also like to imagine Vikings and Romans and various other peoples sailing down this river, which I think probably happened at some point in history. The other thing that my granddad always used to talk about here was that actually on a clear day, you can see all the way out to Anglesey, which is just off the coast here. So Anglesey is an island off the coast of northwest Wales, kind of going out towards Ireland. Like if you get the ferry from Wales to Dublin, that's where the ferry departs from. And you can actually see the island on a clear day. So for me, that's about vision. It's about seeing clearly. So you've got all of these interesting facts. So always think like, what's the photo, but then what's the subtext underneath? What's the interesting fact that you can draw on? Near Thurs Common, there's I still don't fully. I mean, the interesting fact for me is like I still don't fully know my way around Thurs Common. Like if I go there now because I don't live there, I get lost. There's also a big rock, a big sandstone rock, and sandstone is the predominant stone at Thurston. So it has this sort of red Martian appearance to it. And you got all these silver birch trees which kind of contrast. And it's only when I look at the photo that that's really how it stands out in my memory of sunny summer days, silver birch, climbing on this rock, which is called Thors Rock. There's various routes up here, and my granddad was a clean rock climber, so the easy way is sort of the wedge up the middle, but you can climb up here, and as you can see, there's a series of like finger holes, what he would call, and you can climb your way up. There's also someone's leg here, which I apologize for. I did take this photo. I don't know whose leg that is. So yeah, it's not just the location. It's like, well, who were you there with? I was here with my granddad. I was here with the dogs. We used to climb this rock. There's various levels of difficulty. So it's about learning. It's about development. It's about trust as well, because he used to get me to jump for some of these finger holes, and I would take him at his word and jump, and then hope that I would catch him. But he would caught me if I fell. I think because he was scared that he'd get in trouble if I went home with a bus slip. So it's worth thinking about, the places that you grew up in. Where did you really spend time, and who were you with when you spent time there? I think as well, it's worth thinking about, what places matter to your family. So this is a photo. So this is me, aged however old I was, say 6 or 7, maybe 5 or 6. This is my sister Leanne, who looks like she was about 4, I think. This is my dad. So the interesting fact to me is that I'm now my dad was probably slightly younger than I am now, but my son Hugo is now about this size. My daughter Ruma is about this size. And we still do similar things like this. So this photo was taken at a place called Centre Parks in Nottinghamshire, which is a holiday park, but it's in the Sherwood Forest. And it's one of those places that you go and you arrive there, and there's no cars in the holiday park. It's just trees. It's a big area of trees. And it's one of those places that I feel like you can go to recharge. And in fact, we do still go there to recharge, because there's another part of the forest, there's a place called Sherwood Pines where you can go. And that's currently where my wife likes to go. If my wife's feeling low, we want to recharge, if you like, we still go back to the same place. It's not quite the same as when I was small, but it's the same idea. The other thing that stands out to me from this photo is that this game with the bats is called swing ball. Swing ball is the absolute best way to guarantee a fight between small children, because at some point the ball will hit the small child on the forehead. So it's about, there's various ideas. It's about danger. It's about conflict. Like, my dad is clearly mediating between us, waiting for that fight to happen. So have a think about the places that matter. When you go back, where sticks in your memory. You don't have to think very hard about it. Just see what comes up. If it never comes up straight away, then sleep on it, and it'll probably come to you at 4 a.m, because that's the way these things work. Another obvious angle is to think like, well, where do you live now? Obviously, this assumes that on it being different to where you grew up. But a lot of the people I work with, speak to, and I include myself in this bracket, don't live now where I grew up. So I live in Sheffield, which is classed as Northern England, although if you look at the UK as a whole, Sheffield is geographically bang in the middle. So we're kind of northern in culture, but not really in geography. It's also a former industrial city. It was really known for steel making 20 or 30 years ago. So there's this perception of it being quite an industrial city. And that isn't really the case. We're actually a very green city. We have a lot of trees. I took this photo a couple of weeks ago on a run. So sometimes I run from Sheffield city centre back to my house. So running is quite a big theme for me. But we have a lot of these houses that have kind of this stone brick walls and like the trees overhanging the pavements. And it's something that I noticed when I first moved here, because I first moved here as a student, and a lot of the student areas are like this. And it's only walking around that I kind of felt really comfortable, because it's like, well, there's just lots and lots of trees. It didn't feel like being in a big city. It didn't feel like sort of busy and industrious. It felt quite relaxed. It's a slower pace of life than it is, say, down in London, for instance. So this is the same photo, but just from the other direction to prove that I was actually there on my run. This street is called Norfolk Street. Street. If you go to the end of Norfolk Street, you end up in Norfolk Park. And again, you can run up through Norfolk Park. But again, what do you notice? For me, it's all about the trees. I actually have this photo in all of the seasons, and obviously with the trees in various stages of foliage. And it's a different photo, it's a different experience at different times of year. The other thing about this photo is the hill. We're big hills that I now like to run up. And I think the running community in Sheffield is I think it's a good place to practice running, because then you go and run somewhere else and it's nowhere near as hard. So it's worth thinking about, for where you live now, what is the perception of it versus what is your lived reality of it? What day-to-day things do you really love? What brings you joy? And it might not be anything very exciting. It might just be something that you observe. It might just be something that you do frequently. So just to pause briefly at this point, there's a few things. I've kind of mentioned this, but there's a few things to perhaps think about. Is there a difference between where you grew up and where you live now? And if so, why? What keeps you in your current location? For me, it's partly the fact that I have small children, and I really want them to have a sort of stable location and friend group and so on. That's part of the factor. But we also like to be here. I do like to drink beer, and we have great beer here. We have great we have great walks. We have great running routes. We have a lot of parks. We have a lot of trees, and it's the trees that make me happy. That's one of the common threads. When you look back over your story, you see these common threads. I'd say, well, actually, it's about trees, and that surprised me, because I'm not like an overt tree hugger, but it's something that's there throughout a lot of my memories that bring me joy. Thinking about things further away, then obviously there's trips that you've made, or expeditions, or explorations, and so on. So you could have a think as well about, where have you been that is truly unique? So the place that comes to mind for me is the salt flats in Uyuni in Bolivia. So this was a photo I took in 2009. And the interesting fact for me is that, well, there's a few interesting facts. One is that it was at this time of year, because I was there on the 1st of August. The 1st of August is a festival for the local people, which they seem to celebrate sort of, I think it ties into being every 6 weeks around this sort of equinox and solstice. So we're now about 6 weeks after the summer solstice. So I think there's this kind of pagan tradition that crops up where there's some kind of festival every six-ish weeks throughout the year. But anyway, on a day I was there were local people having a festival and whatnot. And to me, that was the interesting fact about it. Yes, it was very beautiful, and yes, it's weird to see flamingos and the remains of a railway there and things like that. But it was the fact that people were having a festival, and I've tried to adopt that into my life now. So every 6 weeks throughout the year, I try to book a day off work and just do something for me, or do something with Lindsay. So there's always something coming up. There's always something to look forward to. It's never a huge amount of time until the next, holiday or bit of time off. Have a think about, where did you have a travel disaster? I think travel disasters are a unanimous source of shared pain and understanding, and you can normally relate stories about that. So I tell one in my email sequences about the time that I lost my money belt on a bus in northern Colombia. And just to recap that story, I was traveling between Cartagena and Santa Marta on the Caribbean coast in Colombia, and halfway there, it was hot. It was just before Christmas, but really hot. I'd relaxed. We were passing all of this beautiful scenery, and then a guard came on and he shouted, "Cambio, cambio, cambio!" Change buses. So grabbed all my stuff, got off. This bus is drowning off into this dust in the distance, and I pat my chest where my money belt usually is, and it's not there. And I've left it on the bus, and it's got my passport in, it's got my cards in, it's got all of my money in, it's got my life in. I'm due to fly home in a week. So I go to the next bus and I explain in broken, stuttering Spanish to the next bus conductor what's happened. And she says in Spanish, she says, get on. She said, sube, get on. We will make some phone calls for you. And we got on this bus, and there's a party atmosphere. There's people, there's like chickens and cages running around. There's everyone's jolly, and I'm sitting there watching the coast pass by, thinking every second that goes past, I'm getting further away from my passport, from my money belt. I can't see her making any phone calls. I can't see any evidence that she is actually making these phone calls. We arrive in Santa Marta. Everyone else gets off. We get to the bus terminal. I go to my traveling companions. Look, let's go. Let's just cut our losses. We'll go. And she says, Espera, wait. And then she disappears for a few minutes and then reappears holding my money belt. And it turns out that she had made a phone call. Another bus company had searched the bus, found it, got it back to put it on another bus to Santa Marta that night. So I got it back. So it was about trust. It was about trust that I wasn't expecting to receive. So yeah, where did you not get to? So I mean, the reason we were going to Santa Marta was to do this trek. You can do a trek to a place called La Ciudad Perdida, which is the lost city. And you go through this amazing, low jungle, effectively. This is my back. It's not the most flattering photo, but it is me. And you eventually, after a few days, you arrive at the remains of a civilization called the Tairona people. And again, you've got to ask, what's the interesting fact? So, well, there's a few interesting facts. There's this guy here who was Australian, and he did the entire walk in thongs or flip-flops, which is a very Australian thing to do. So he's, that's about stereotypes. It's about what you also can't see looking out from this photo is that over this valley there's all sorts of remains that have been buried under the jungle, that are hidden, but they are there. Another thing that you can't see from this photo is behind me, further up on the hill, there's a small base of army Marines. So in Colombia, like you're never very far away from the military. You're never very far away from the threat of danger, I guess. So again, it's about threat. It could be about various things, but you've always got to ask, looking at the photo, is the interesting fact that's going to help you tell a story about it? And for me, this was all about, it was all about the fiasco I had with the money belts, and then the hike that I did was like the reward at the end of it. Have a think also about, where have you been that kind of calls you back? So this is also in Colombia, and I really love Colombia, actually. I definitely feel a call to go back. This is a town called Bamba in the southern part of the country, and you can basically walk around a series of pre-Columbian burial sites, and the place itself is called Tierra Dentro. And we just got there. I was with one traveling companion, a girl that I met out there, and we decided to go here on a whim. We actually decided to go to Colombia completely on a whim. We weren't going to go initially. So it was all very intuitive. And we ended up in this place. We were going to just stay a day, and we just felt like we wanted to stay longer. All of the locals kept trying to talk us into staying longer. I think because it was off the tourist paths, everyone was very friendly, and people just kept on trying to get us to stay longer, telling us about walks you could do in the area. So I can't say for certain that I'll ever specifically go back to Tierra Dentro, but it's somewhere that I went and I felt this kind of feeling of, this feels right. This feels like somewhere I want to stay put for a bit. Finally, another thing you can think about is, where do you plan to visit? So this photo is of the cave art in France, a place called Pecmo, and these drawings date from before the last ice age, so they date from about 17,000 BC. And they were the most of the images, rather than our art today, where you see more people, the artwork of that epoch was more based around animals. It was because obviously it was the animals that populated their lives, and this was a hunter-gatherer lifestyle before agriculture. So you get all these photos of aurochs and other creatures painted onto the walls. And I think for me as well, I'd love to go because it's a connection to someone who lived in the distant past. But you can be there, you can be right next to where they were painting. So it's something that I might go in the future. But this is something that I write about a little bit in some of my writings, because it communicates perspective. It's a marker of culture, and stories are a cultural, artistic thing. And I would argue that art as a human thing is potentially what binds us together. It's what forms communities. It's what establishes trust. I think there's a reason why humans throughout the ages have, as far as we can document, have been creating works of art. And it's to communicate what mattered to you. It's to be seen. I think. So a few final comments before I leave up. So yeah, so as I said, it's often not about the location itself. So yes, you can write about the location itself, but it's more about, well, what does it mean to you? When have you been there? Who were you with? What did you do there? And then you always have to look at it and ask, like, well, what is the interesting factor about that? What's the thing that, if someone was looking at a photo, what would you see that they can't see? Because that's when you write that story, that's what gets people's attention. I think for like social media and things like that, locations obviously do lend themselves to photos, but a photo may not necessarily capture your lived experience of that location. So some locations, it's actually better. I mean, this is why the novel is so powerful, is because if you think about the worlds of Narnia or Lord of the Rings or all of these places, Mordor, it's actually much more powerful left to your imagination, rather than telling someone specifically this is what it is. So sometimes the photo can help. Sometimes you might want to leave it out. It depends a little bit on the medium. I think social channels lend themselves to photos. If you're writing a print newsletter or an email, I'm sort of 50-50 on. I do like including photos in emails, but often I think there's a use case in some circumstance for like leaving it to the reader's imagination and just describing the situation to them, which also forces you to be a better writer, because you have to describe it in more detail if there isn't a visual aid that you can lean on as a crux. So that's the end of my thoughts. Just for the benefits of the recording, the next step out of this. So in a minute or so, I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to ask you both if any ideas have come up and whatnot. Just for anyone watching the recording, obviously we do these calls every month. These calls explore a specific aspect of the process that I go through with a client to explore their story. Obviously, there is a done with you or a done for you version of that, and that is my Story Jumpstart program. So the Story Jumpstart program is a 2-hour conversation with me. So it's a guided conversation. So rather than working through it by yourself and wondering whether you're just wasting time and tying yourself in knots, it's a guided conversation with me where we work through it in detail, in dialogue, in conversation. And it's a much more comfortable way, I think, of exploring your story. It's not necessarily that it has to be done with me, but I think if you're going to explore your story in detail, I think doing it in dialogue is quite a powerful way of doing it. So what I do in the Story Jumpstart is we explore your story from all of these different angles. I then get hold of the transcript of those conversations. I tidy it up and I extract out different stories. So this was one I did for a client who's given me permission to share this. So I extract out the different threads, the different stories, with the tidied up section of the transcript, and I indicate, what do I think that story was about? Because what the story is about is going to be the bridge concept and the way that you then link to your message or to your sales pitch. So we start to build up this database. We use a program called Airtable to build this up in terms of this being your kind of armory of story ideas, if you like, so that next time you're doing a presentation and you need a story, you don't have to rack your brains. You can just go into the Airtable and pick something up. Or next time you hire a copywriter, you don't have to brief them for 4 hours. You just send them the Airtable. As part of the story jumpstart process, you get 5 months of access to my story copywriter community, which includes my Nurture Email Mastery course, which is my main training, and also to my forum, where I encourage my members to post their work, ask for feedback. We then have fortnightly Zoom calls every 2 weeks to discuss the things that you've been working on. So there's this element of accountability. If you know that there's a call coming up in 2 weeks and you haven't written anything for 2 weeks, that's a good incentive to go and write something, even if you don't publish it. Like what a lot of the guys will do is they'll draft something up quickly, and I can see them doing this. They'll draft it up quickly just before the call and share this Google Doc, and I'm like, well, that's better than not doing anything, because it's much easier to publish something that's in draft form. The hardest part is getting it into draft form in the first place. So I am going to stop my screen share. I'm going to stop the record.